Okay, hello everybody. Hi there. Can you hear and see us?
Good evening, everybody. Always have a little bit of a delay, don't we, Mark? It's like it says like 5 seconds delay that we just waiting to see when we reply. Yes, they can hear us. Fantastic.
Fantastic, great, lovely, nice, wonderful. So thank you everyone for joining for the second of our LOMLOE webinar series. We're going to be looking at practical LOMLOE today. So the plan is we're going to do a quick review of last week's session. Just for those of you who maybe weren't able to make the session, you can find that online as well. And also for those of us who were here last week, just to sort of refresh our memories on what we were looking at. Then we're going to be looking at some practical LOMLOE using competencies in literature, culture, and CLIL lessons. And at the end, a summary and hopefully any questions should you have any. So we'll give it a few more seconds for people just to connect. Please do remember that throughout this session, it's all about trying to think about LOMLOE in our classrooms. If you have any questions, do share them. We keep our eyes on the chat box and we'll try to answer and address them as much as we can as we go through.
I think we've got the Q&A box as well, right, Mark? So if you've got a specific question, that always helps us a little bit because we use the chat box just, you know, for general comments, and maybe you guys are sharing ideas as well. So any questions, pop them into the Q&A, and at the end of the session, as Mark said, if we haven't covered it, we'll come back to it. Let us know as well, just because I'm super nosy, where you're joining us from. I always like to see where everybody's joining us from. So yeah, everyone's saying hi in the chat box, which is nice.
Where are you joining us from, Rachel?
I'm joining you from Madrid, Mark, like you didn't know. And you?
Yeah, good. I'm joining you from Avila, up in the mountains here.
Fantastic. Oh, there we go. We've got some now. Burgos. Fantastic.
Oh, nice. Anyone else want to share? Madrid. Wonderful.
Wonderful. We've got a nice mixture. Oh, Gran Canaria from the islands as well. Wonderful. Thank you for joining us, everybody. Shall we kick off then, Mark?
Yeah, I think that's all good starting points. So to start with, what we looked at last week was basically the levels of LOMLOE. We started with the big overall, the overarching objectives. These are key points that are going to be trying to integrate it into the system at the highest levels. That is, one, we want to try and encourage the interests of our children in our classes, make sure that their rights are integral and at the center of the system. That goes along with trying to drive gender equality. We also want to improve the schools and the personalization of learning, put digital competence at the heart of learning, and also looking at sustainable development as a part of education. So these are all sort of the big factors at the top level. Then throughout the session last week, we looked at the sort of the next step down. These were our key competencies. These are specifically competencies that go across all of the different subjects. They're not subject specific, okay? That is, we want to try and encourage linguistic communication, multilingual competence, mathematics, digital competence, personal and social learning to learn, citizenship, entrepreneurship, and cultural awareness. Now, these are obviously across all subjects. There's a lot of them that as language teachers, we've been doing for years anyway. I mean, linguistic communication is at the heart of everything we do. There are a few others in there that might be new to some people. Maybe it's whether it's STEM, that's science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. That is all about critical thinking and creative thinking and problem solving. And then there's entrepreneurship, which is similar, but it is more focused on the critical analysis of different items. But these are like general areas. These are like parts that form part of what they call the perfil de salida. No, we want the kids to come out with these competencies and have these from all subjects. Taking a step further, then there are specific competencies. These are our specific competencies for language or foreign language. They are comprensión y producción, which we're familiar with. That's speaking, reading, writing, listening, depends on how you want to name it. Then we have interaction, which would be things like collaboration, mediation, which is summarizing and using other languages to help understand, but really it's summarizing and communicating ideas. Plurilinguismo, which is using different languages, and cultural competence, which is obviously cultural awareness. So those are your specific competencies for language acquisition or foreign language. And then we looked at 5 points last week. Number 1 was planning selectively. Number 2, noticing opportunities. Number 3, adapting. Number 4, scaffolding. And finally, reflection and self-assessment. We're going to be looking a bit of this as well this week. We're going to be looking at opportunities. We're going to be thinking about different activity types we can do to integrate LOMLOE. Just quickly, I'm going to go super quick. If you want more detail, just jump back and watch the previous recording. You'll be able to get hold of that.
Yeah, I was going to say, Mark, just so that everybody knows, these are obviously a series. This is a series of webinars. So Mark, as Mark said, we kicked off last week. So yeah, we're going to go through now as a little reflection task. But if you do want more information on anything you missed last week, then you will be able to watch that webinar back. And just quickly, because I've just noticed this happened to me a couple of weeks ago in a webinar, Mark. In the chat box, please select to send your message to everybody, because this happened to me a couple of weeks ago, that we were interacting with messages, and then one of the attendees said, is it possible that everybody's sending messages just to you? And yes, they were completely right. So we like a busy chat box. We like comments and suggestions and idea sharing. So please click on everyone. And if you have got a specific question that you just want to throw to us, you can use the Q&A box.
Wonderful. Yeah, so please do get in touch in the chat box, speak with us. It really does help along with the session. Okay, just very, very briefly. So we looked at planning selectively. Think about the different points we want to cover. We identified that we have 8 stops or 8 sites that we want to be looking at. We don't have to do them all the time. Remember that we're just looking at moments where we can focus on or review or observe how our learners are performing. So we don't have to always work on multilingual competence in everything, but maybe there are some activities that we pay attention to. Another point was to notice the opportunity. So in many of the tasks that we do already, we're looking at linguistic competence or social competence. We're already looking at competencies. And this is also a point important to mention, that Cambridge has a framework for competencies that is really, really in depth. It goes into specifics and specific details that we can use. It lines up really, really perfectly with LOMLOE competencies. Okay, so have a look there as well. There's a nice sort of crossover, maybe as a foundation. The third point was adapting activities, right? So we looked at a couple of classic classroom activities, and we thought about different ways that we could adapt them to work on competencies. Another one was talking about some projects, which I have a feeling we might be looking at a bit later on today.
I have that feeling as well, Mark.
So this was just thinking about different ways that we can adapt our classroom activities in the slightest ways to focus on more competencies. A lot of the time it doesn't require adaptation, but it's more noticing and slight modification. Then for the last 2 points, we looked at different ways of scaffolding, the importance of structuring clearly so learners know what's expected of them. And remember, we don't just have to change content to adapt our classes and to scaffold, but we can also change the process and the final product or the end activity. So there's many ways to adapt and to scaffold. It's not just about giving different worksheets or different activities. And then finally, we took a brief step into reflection and assessment. We looked at ways of taking like statements and objectives from our framework and converting them into self-reflection questions. Again, we're going to be looking throughout this session at more ways we can encourage self-assessment and self-reflection, as well as reflection from a teacher's point of view. So in 5 minutes, we've just covered everything we did in an hour and a half last week.
Yeah, lots of information, as we said. If you do kind of want to take a step back, and maybe it's just kind of taking a look and picking out, you know, small little sections, then yeah, we would suggest that you take a look at the webinar from last week. But let's kick off with our content this week, Mark, right?
That's right, yeah.
So, inclusive classrooms. This is where we'd like you to get involved. Now that you're all typing to everyone in the chat box, big question for you, and it is quite a big question. What does the inclusive classroom look like to you? So we've asked you to share something that makes an inclusive classroom, in your opinion. And of course, you can share more ideas if you have them. But thinking about this, what does it look like? What are your kind of top tips, techniques for your classroom in terms of inclusiveness or inclusivity, Mark? Either
same
or.
difference. I think it's the same. I think the concept of being inclusive, you know. So I mean, like Rachel said, isn't it? Like, just share in the chat box what it is for you. What do you do? What do you think being inclusive means?
See, we've got lots of people from lots from Madrid. We've got Catherine as well. I don't know, Francesca, where Magdaro is, but I'm going to find out now. I love hearing new places, because Mark and I both do a lot of traveling for work, and it's always great when you hear of a place you've never been to. I've never been there.
It's nice.
Include any student, everyone can participate. A classroom where everybody's learning is taken into account, absolutely.
Yeah, an inclusive classroom is a class who have different skills can participate in an integral way. It's a lovely one. Yeah, talking from an intercultural point of view. Nice.
Lovely.
Yeah, so not just thinking about ability, we're talking about background and the profiles of our learners. Nice. Yeah,
definitely. Thinking about necessities, what each student is capable of. That's nice. I like that word, capabilities. That's really nice. Opportunities to listen to them all. Oh, thank you, Francesca. Very interesting. You see, you learn something new every day. Equal participation, collaboration. Wonderful, fantastic ideas. Thank you, guys. Shall we crack on, Mark?
Yeah. So, well, would you like to carry on, Rich?
Sure. Okay. So yeah, I think everyone picked this up really well, to be honest, in the chat box. So we're talking about access for everybody. So if you take a look here in the key terminology box, inclusion is a sense of belonging. I love that. Belonging, feeling respected, valued, feeling supported, and you know, feeling that sense of commitment as well from others. And I would say that's not just coming from the teacher, that needs to come from everybody in that class. So really kind of creating that culture in the classroom, removing barriers to allow everyone to be able to access the task, clear instructions all the way through. And as Mark was just talking about, scaffolding and the necessary support there as well.
Yeah, so when we talk about scaffolding, it's nice to think of it as scaffolding up to, not around. So it's quite a common way to scaffold or to vary the level of our lessons is by taking the middle level and then either making the task more challenging or making it more accessible or easier for lower level learners. But another approach that we can do, which is a bit more inclusive, is scaffold up. That is, we take the lower level in the group and we make sure that that level, or not just talking about language ability here, we're talking about general access, like the simplest access. We make sure that everybody can participate. And then we up the level or the difficulty from that starting point. So at the basis of everything is everybody can participate. Everybody can be involved in that class, you know, and we just as teachers think about, well, maybe little Tomas is really, really, really good. I mean, he was in England for a year. He could speak English perfectly. Well, maybe we want to up the challenge for him instead of bringing it down to more of an average level. You know, it's thinking of it in a slightly different way. And we could do that in many different ways, right? I mean, first of all, we could, when giving instructions, so we've just put this activity on the screen. It can be any activity. This is a writing task now. So what we could do is maybe put the instructions on the screen or on the board and underline the key information. Okay, so everybody knows what they have to read. Read this email and the notes. Write your email or the notes. Okay, nice. 100 words, check. I have to check my spelling. So it's kind of like nice bullet points that are easy to quickly go to. We could even ask our learners maybe in the lesson to underline these points in their notebook so they have it as a reference or highlight or whatever you want to do, if they can draw in their books, obviously. Then we could maybe put points on the board or some images to follow. So we know it's a reading. Read this email, write 100 words, check your spelling and grammar. So they've got 3 easily accessible points of reference that they can just look at and go to. Or if you want to really simplify it and bring it right down to the basic level, well, why don't we just give them 4 clear points that they have to follow? Read this email, write 100 words, using all the notes, check your spelling and grammar. You know, everybody can access this then, you know, it's not a limiting factor. Maybe there are some dyslexic learners in the class. This could be a good way to help support them because it's reducing the cognitive load. But also maybe there are some learners with attention difficulties. And this is another nice way because they're really controlled, specific, easy things to follow. You know, and then it goes across to differentiating support. That is like, we can then provide different levels of support for the learner, you know, whether it's less support for the stronger learners or more support for the not as strong learners. And in this writing task, we have a model text, we have a vocabulary list, and we have a graphic organizer, right? So maybe with the stronger learners, we just give them the question and a graphic organizer. Okay, and then they have to be more creative. They have to be more critical. They have to really try to think about how to write this. And that's a nice challenge for a learner, right? Maybe for the middle level of the class, we give them the graphic organizer and some vocabulary. So now they've got a bit of support. Oh, I could talk about this. I could talk about that. It's more accessible. It's going to be easier for them to participate. You know, they don't have to recall so much knowledge, and yet it's still challenging for them. And the other suggestion is the bottom level there, or the most support, sorry. We give them the model text. I mean, this is just a part of the question, but we could give them a model text plus the graphic organizer plus the vocabulary, just as much support as you feel they need. It's just thinking about the different levels. It's not always about more. It's often about controlling what we do give. And I mean, that's one example. There are many ways we can differentiate learning. One of them is maybe providing choice. You know, that is, we give them a text, then they choose how they complete the text. Maybe they choose one of these 4 different activities. Okay, and these 4 different activities focus on different skills. There's communication, creativity, there's critical thinking, there's collaboration. You know, there's lots of competencies in these questions, and the learners can choose what they're most confident doing or how they feel best about working.
It's going to be quite a nice one as well, Mark. I'm thinking in, you know, your traditional course book, you've got an activity with, you know, let's say it's a reading activity like this one with certain, you know, tasks that students have to work through afterwards. Providing choice there and saying to the students, right, where do you want to start? And maybe just thinking, maybe asking them, which of those tasks would you like to work on individually? Which would you like to work on with a partner? And which would you like to work on in a group, for example? Quite a nice way, maybe, to encourage the students to take a little bit of responsibility, but also for the students to identify, I think that one's going to be a bit tricky for me, so I'd like to work with my classmates on that one, whereas this activity I feel really confident about. So it's just that personalization factor. And sorry if I say your name wrong, Charo or Caro, I'm not sure. Talking about their experiences, personalization again, you know, kind of giving them that opportunity to put their own ideas, talk about their own experiences, I think is wonderful as well.
Yeah, absolutely. This is again, there's a fundamental point of LOMLOE. It's all about personalizing learning. If take opportunities to move towards a more personalized education, and it doesn't have to mean loads more work for us as teachers. It's often just about reframing or changing the perspective of the activity.
Exactly, absolutely. And hopefully that will come across in the session today, along with the support that we can provide from Cambridge. So should we move on to the next big question, Mark?
Absolutely.
So thinking about stories and literature this time. Oh, question for you. Before you answer this one, tell us in the chat box, what levels are you teaching? It's always quite nice to get a feel for what levels you're teaching. Are you primary, pre-primary, even secondary, a mixture of everything? It's always quite nice for us. We're going to go through ideas for it's a bit of a mixture of everything, isn't it, today, Mark? And hopefully even when we're talking about primary ideas or secondary ideas, you can think, well, this could be adapted. A mixture, a complete mixture. This is always, we should have done a poll for this one. It's always
that would have been nice,
poll, isn't it?
Maybe next week.
Maybe next week. Secondary, primary, fourth of VESO, first of bachelor, so a complete mixture of everything. But yeah, absolutely. I think it's always still, we can really share ideas and learn from each other, even when you are teaching completely different levels. Thank you. And back to this big question then. So stories and literature. So if you're teaching primary, you're probably more likely to be using stories. There's probably some literature in there as well. And obviously for secondary, I suppose you're focusing more on literature, both, I guess, in different ways. What competencies could we focus on? So one idea on how we can include competencies in stories and literature, and of course, more ideas are always welcome.
So let's have a look. So how can we develop competencies? Yeah, cultural competence. I like that. Nice. Straight in there, Susanna. So obviously a lot of stories tell, that was going to be such a silly expression. I was going to say a lot of stories tell a lot of different stories, but obviously.
That's profound, Mark.
Isn't that deep, right?
That needs to be a quote, I think. Stick that one in next week. I'm sorry. Easy readers, cultural, I think, came up straight away. Personal, cultural competencies again from Carlos. Yeah. Oh, lovely. Creative idea there.
I like that. That's nice.
Yes. And do you know what? And there are, especially with primary, there are so many stories definitely stories that I was told as a child that definitely need new endings, usually more feminist endings for the most part. So that's a great one. I love that.
Yeah, invent new endings. I like the idea of the STEM, the build a new bed for Goldie. I do like brilliant. That. That's fun, isn't it? Yeah, good. Excellent. Yeah, so I think that's covered nicely, isn't it? I mean, it is about that. There's so many things we can do that, and it is often cultural.
Definitely. Should we have a look at an example then, Mark?
Absolutely.
So we've got here the myth of Icarus, taken from one of our courses, Be Curious. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a little look at this. We're going to imagine that we are, we're going to cover this with our class. And we're going to think about what competencies we can really focus on through some different activities here. So first up, what we could do is we could, before we look at the story, so we've shown you a little sneak peek, and maybe, you know, you've asked the students, quickly open your books, take a look for 10 seconds, and then close it. And then what I want my students to do is thinking about the characters, the setting, the plot, and the theme. We're going to brainstorm some questions. So this is quite nice because thinking about an activity like this, once you've created those questions, you're probably able to use them for any story you're going to read in class. You know, if you keep them quite general. So who are the characters? Who is the protagonist? Who needs help? You realize there's always a character that needs help, or who has the problem. There's always someone who has a problem in the story. For example, maybe we can ask them to do that in partners, we can ask them to do it in groups. As I said, we can maybe create a digital Padlet, for example, and then we can keep those questions there and keep adding to them every lesson. So once we've got all of those questions, maybe let's say I've asked students to write them on Post-its and now they're up at the front of the class. What I want my students to do now is back to their books. I want them just to look at the pictures from the story. So taking a look at the pictures from the story, back to my questions, and I ask my class, what questions can we answer? Now, it might be that they say initially, they probably will, none of them, because we haven't read the story yet. So what do I say? Well, let's be creative. Let's be imaginative. Let's think about the possibilities. So who do we think the characters are? What do we think is happening? What do we think the problem is? Okay, so it's quite a nice way for the students to start thinking of possible vocabulary that they're going to see throughout the story, but also just hopefully creating some motivation for reading the story as well, creating some interest. Moving on, we can take one section of the story. So maybe we started the story here. You remember from the whole page, this was just the start of the story. And you see here that they're talking about the Minotaur being a terrible monster. And I want to ask my students here, again, being quite creative and imaginative, how do you think they move? How do you think they speak? So really thinking about the character. And what's nice with this activity is it can be a completely individual activity where you ask them to think about these things in silence. Maybe you want them to write notes, but what I would do here is I'd have them working together in groups. I'd have them creating some movements, creating some parts of the speech, thinking about how to use their voice. So again, really kind of bringing the story to life. And if anyone's seen me doing other sessions, you know that I'm very passionate about these things, bringing lots of creative drama style activities to the story. So back to our story. Let's think now. We've read the whole story together. And what could we do next? Again, thinking about our speech and using our voice and bringing that story to life. What we've done is we've taken some key lines from the story, so some parts of kind of like direct speech, and I want my students to think about how they would say these things. And you can keep it related to the story. So how would you say it like Icarus, right, Mark? How would you say it like the monster? It could be ridiculous. How would you say it like Mark Meredith? How would you say it like my abuela in the pueblo? You know, it can be silly, it can be creative. But again, what they're doing is they're bringing their own ideas, I guess, and making it more personal to them as well. You can read the story again then, and you can actually ask the students to read that part of the story. So when you have the lines, the whole class can come out with those little lines and, you know, how they're saying it in funny, silly ways.
Yeah, there's lots of really fun ways you can do this. Like another nice idea is maybe have some emoticons on the wall and get them to repeat them and point at the emoticons and say it in a happy voice, or say it in a sad voice, say it in an angry voice, and just really encourage them to participate.
Are you talking about emojis, Mark? I'm
talking about emojis. What did I say? I'm terrible. I'm down with the kids these days.
Well, that does lead us on quite nicely to the next activity.
Precisely that, because in fact, emojis, emoticons, smiley faces, whatever you want to call them, they are such a great tool. And once we've finished with an activity or a story, we can ask our learners maybe to say, how did this story make you feel? You know, like they can choose one of the faces, and maybe they were really happy with Icarus because he got to fly, or maybe they were really sad when his wings melted. Spoiler alert, I've told you the story.
Oh, Mark.
I'm sorry. But maybe we can get them to sort of to engage on an emotional level with the story, I suppose it is. But what's a really nice point is we can say, look, show us how you feel about the story, and we can then encourage them to say, well, okay, why or how does it make you feel this way? Or why do you feel this way? And it's another step forward. It's not just saying, oh, I'm happy. It's I'm happy because, and that's an engagement that we're developing with literature. First of all, we really want we really want kids to engage with literature, right? We all know the benefits of it, but it's just a nice tool to help them start to, I suppose I don't know what the correct term is, but it's
engagement.
Yeah, maybe I think engagement is what I'm going for.
I was very distracted, Mark. Do you know why? Because there's always one point in a webinar, there's usually more than once in a webinar actually, when one of the teachers tells us something they've done in the class, and you wish that you could have been in the class at that moment. Yeah. And it's obviously Marina telling us about when her class prepared a cyclone. And now I'm just like, my brain is going crazy because I'm trying to imagine how that worked. It's fantastic. So thank you for sharing ideas, guys. This is really nice.
It's wonderful. That's a really creative way to engage with the story as well.
I can imagine it was a bit chaotic, I can imagine, but I love it.
Yeah. I guess it was quite breezy to do.
Lovely. I knew you were trying to think of something, Mark. Right, so let's relate this to LOMLOE then, Mark, right?
Yes, so the series of activities, maybe some of them ring true to you already and you do the similar things, or you've tried these different things. And these are the type of things that really do help bring us across to a LOMLOE sort of way of delivering lessons. No, because if we look at our 8 initial competencies, that first activity we saw, that was a lot of social and learning to learn. There's study skills in there, isn't there? There's working in a group, there's communicating, there's sharing ideas. Then there's the cultural side of things, because you're really starting to develop an understanding of the characters and maybe the personalities of the story. Then the next one with the pictures, this one obviously fundamentally had linguistic competence in it, because we were retelling the story, we were linking ideas, but also it's recognizing and relating to the characters in the story. Another one there, then the final 2 activities, mostly focused on linguistic competence, but I'm sure you could find other links to other competencies. And that's kind of like the message from before. Remember that competence-based learning, or using competencies in the classroom, is mostly about noticing and finding them and thinking about what you as a teacher want to evaluate, and then encouraging our learners to evaluate them.
Now, all of the activities that we just ran through actually didn't really take a lot of time to plan on our part, because we have these competency activity cards, live competency activity cards that are available for you to download. I would suggest, and it's just purely because I'm like this, printing them out and putting them up and organizing them, because that's me. I would do that, but if not, they're all available for you online anyway, obviously. And what we did is we ran through these activity cards and we just applied them to that story and that literature. So any task, any activity, and these activity cards are lovely because they're really adaptable. So you can see there, I'm sure you recognize there, the story ingredients that we did, the let's pretend, the say it like, and then the activity that Mark looked at, the activity feelings. So we'll give you the link to these that you can download them there.
Yeah, and what you'll notice in the top right-hand corner of these cards is there's these lovely yellow semicircles, suns or sols, whatever you want to call them, and they are identifying within the competency, in this case it's critical thinking, they're identifying like the specific skill within that competency that the learners are working on while completing these activities. Okay, so for those of you who don't know about the Cambridge framework, again, the Cambridge framework is a very in-depth sort of look at competence-based learning, and it informs a lot of our courses, but it's also freely available to anybody online. We'll provide the link for you in the chat box. Go find it, download the resources. But what it is, for example, this one, critical thinking. With critical thinking, that's very much a big part of the entrepreneurship competence. Okay, that means basically when it talks about entrepreneurship, it's talking about problem solving, it's talking about creative thinking, critical thinking, about creating a solution, you know, and finding a problem and creating a solution. And in this case, it's about analyzing and understanding, first of all, right? And this one then, in this activity card, you can see this is from the framework for primary. Okay, these are the 3 core components: identifying and classifying information, recognizing patterns, and interpreting and drawing inferences from arguments of data. In this case, it'll be from the story, what we saw. Now, as we saw in the previous webinar, we can take this information and we can reframe it to be a reflective question for our kids. Okay, so in this case, the first one, identifying and classifying information, identifies characters. Well, we maybe want to encourage them to answer the question, can I say the names of the characters and describe the story? And then they'll think to themselves, well, yes, I can. I know that Icarus and Icarus's father, who was called, I don't know, Ocarus. I don't remember the father's name. So I can't do that. So probably I need to go back and reread the story, you know. But that's, you know, we're taking a specific thing and we're allowing them the opportunity to reflect on it. And not only are they self-reflecting, but they're also allowing us to see how they've participated and how they feel they performed. Maybe they don't know, maybe they need more support. Well, I'll remember that for the next time. You know, it's a nice evaluative tool for them mostly, but for us, when we come to creating a profile of that learner.
So the activity cards, Alex has popped a couple of links into the chat box. Thank you, Alex. Just really nice ways, a little tick box for us as teachers to know that we are covering these things. So choose a fun activity, and the bonus of that is that you can easily identify the competency that you've just covered in class.
So another one that we can do just in case at the end is if you don't have the framework, maybe you just want to integrate a more general reflection task, or sentence starters is always nice. At the end of any sort of story or activity or unit or project or whatever it is you feel, you can do a sentence starter. And it's as simple as putting these 4 sentence starters on the board or on the wall, maybe put it on a poster, and they can say, I was good at, I liked, I have problems with, and next time I might. And we're getting them into the process of reflecting.
Wonderful.
Next big question.
Next big question.
So
culture lessons.
Culture. So we're going to be looking at culture lessons. So I'm going to give you an example, and we'd like you to say which competencies we could cover looking at this lesson. So on the screen you can see
Ooh, Jerez.
Yeah, we're very fond of Jerez, aren't we?
We are. We stayed at a lovely place, didn't we, in Jerez, Mark? Sherry Park. It was wonderful. We did an event there. Any teachers from Jerez, give us a shout. Yeah, lovely city. Well, this then is a festival, so have a look at it, have a quick think. What opportunities can you notice for competencies to be worked on here? We're going to speed up a bit, so we don't want to be here all evening, do we, everyone? So get in the chat box quickly, give us a couple of examples. I'm happy to be.
I don't mean it like that, I mean, you know what I mean.
Katie is in Jerez, yay!
Fantastic.
Social, personal, cultural. Thank
Wonderful.
you, Susanna.
Absolutely. Anyone else want to share an idea? Learn to learn.
Learning
Absolutely.
to learn. Pop your your suggestions into everyone, so everyone can see your suggestions. Otherwise, it looks like Mark and I are going a bit crazy when we start reading things out that you can't see. That's the only thing. Yep. Social, critical thinking, wonderful.
Yeah, so we identified 4. They were competence, linguistic, personal, social, learning to learn, cultural. There's also a possibility for digital. If we take a look at the Explore It, you know, this opportunity here is find 3 more interesting facts about Spanish traditions. You know, like there's loads of like nice little integrated opportunities to evaluate and test and work on and develop our competencies. You know, but a really nice way of taking a culture lesson and just taking it that step further and opening it up to be able to do so many more activities and competencies and learning opportunities is maybe doing a project. Now, this is a project that you could do with this festival, for example, which is making a web page, okay? Basically taking the information, finding the information, adapting it, putting it into another context. You know, it's about creating something from something. Now this, what competencies could we work on with this? I mean, there's a load more. Does anyone want to have a go at sharing a couple of ideas there in the chat box? So we've got a project now. So we've got the culture lesson. We talked about those competencies. Is there any other competencies? Maybe we want to go more specific. Yeah, Maria's spot on my feelings with this, almost all of them.
Yeah.
It is, projects are going to be a real powerful tool for everybody when it comes around to LOMLOE, because it's a real vehicle for competence-based learning. Like, this is the activity, like just talking about the Cambridge framework competencies, we're looking at things like social responsibilities here. We're talking about communication. We're also talking about different ways of collaborating, you know. There's just different opportunities here and different ways we can adapt the task to be more specific for social, for example. So in this case, we might want to encourage our learners to look for cultural information about their festival included in their webpage. Like, we're there and it's giving us guidance on what we want to be doing, right? Like, go on, kids, why don't you find something else? What about this? Or do you want to do a different festival? Let's go find information. You know, we're always trying to encourage them to be autonomous and take control. And this is really nice, because especially if you have some sort of graphic organizer to support, to structure, to scaffold, it means more people can participate. But again, like Maria said, Maria Jose said in the chat box, it's very much about all competencies, but on another note, it's also all of our subject-specific competencies. You know, we're talking about projects, we're talking about using our 4 skills, speaking, reading, writing, listening. We're also talking about interaction, because they have to work together. They have to work as a team. We're talking about mediation. So mediation is taking information from one point and presenting it and communicating it in another way. So in this case, it might be from a book, from a poster, from a website, and then they're going to create their own website. You know, they're adapting information. And we could even do mediation plurilinguismo here. We could get them to find the official website in their Spanish or their own language, and then they take that information and put it into English. You know, that is mediation, that is plurilinguismo. And obviously it's cultural, because we're talking about festivals. That's pretty much implied. I genuinely feel, I don't know about what you think, Rachel, but as language teachers, we're really fortunate because we do most of these things anyway.
I think that's it. I think it's recognizing what we're already doing, and, you know, just looking at the chat box already, the ideas that come in, it's, you know, we are already doing these things. So it's really us being able to support in helping you to recognize and to, you know, identify, because obviously there will be an element of you know, identifying and making it clear that that is happening in your classroom.
And once we know what we're looking for, then we can evaluate from a teacher's perspective. That allows us, doesn't it, to say, well, I'm going to be looking at learning to learn, digital literacy, and, for example, collaboration or interaction. And then I can give learners for this project a mark on that activity. And we can build up that profile of the learner there, and we can say at the end of the year, well, they were really good with their collaborative work, but little Maria has to work a bit more on her communication. You know, and not only is that, like, it's not about proving their worth, but it's about us being able to recognize how to support them better as well. That's the key. But again, like this worksheet is, again, these worksheets we're going to share with you a pack later on that has
spoiler alert, Mark.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Surprise.
Forgive me. Well, you're going to have access to a lot of things later. Another thing that we look at is a rubric for evaluation. Now, this rubric is one that we have prepared for projects that are in our courses, but again, this is adaptable. It's about what areas can we work on that are not just specifically language use. No, we often tend to focus as language teachers on language use, but there's also a lot of other areas like planning and organization, the final product, the creativity, and having a rubric to follow and sharing that rubric with our learners is also a really great thing to do. If you want to add anything there, Rachel.
No, just to say, yeah, we are going to share these resources and some more that we're going to show you in the next section of the session. Some of them are specific to primary. However, all of the rubrics and all of the templates that we give you, we've always shared with secondary teachers as well, who found them really useful. So don't let that put you off. So let's move on to the final section. I think instead of giving you this big question to answer now, I think I'd just like you to reflect.
Ooh,
do you see what I did there?
Powerful, I like that.
I'm a little bit aware of time at the moment, but I think it's quite a big, I mean, this is probably the biggest of the big questions. And this is what we're going to be looking at in the next section, as well as this use of projects in class, because as Mark was saying, these will be, I think, one of your most valuable tools in the classroom. The use of project work, and sometimes quite often, I'm sure you'll find this, and already I'm thinking of the cyclone task, you know, normal activities that come in course books, and we can adapt those and create them, create a more kind of collaborative project to come from the kind of more traditional little tasks that we usually find. So using projects, of course, it helps us to develop different competencies, as we've said, Maria, Jose, all of them, absolutely. It's a really good way to kind of cover all of them, including a range of content and inputs. It allows us to evaluate continuously, so lots of formative assessment throughout. We are going to give you some tools and suggestions for doing that. And as Mark was just saying, evaluating more than language. I think our students are, I mean, that's what they expect. And I think it's quite nice, especially with self-reflection, peer assessment tasks, when we ask them not to assess things like linguistic activities, we can assess other things. We're going to look at that a little bit later on, so I'm not going to say too much right now. So I'm going to show you this, one of our primary projects, and we are going to share this one with you and a few others as well. And we're going to I'm going to run through a few activities that I would do in class, focusing on using this project, whether it's, you'll notice as well, there are a few icons for teaching online as well. So, you know, I think we always need to be aware that that might be a possibility at some point. Maybe there are still some hybrid classes. Usually, I think now in Spain, I think everybody is back to face-to-face, but it's always nice to think about how we can adapt it for a different approach as well. Clocks and watches of the future. So the project is set out into 3 clear stages. So we're asking the students to research, then to organise the information in groups, and all working towards that final presentation at the end. So what we could do to kick this off is ask the students a question to kind of pique their interest, hopefully get them into the project. Would a world without clocks be possible? And how would we know what time of day it is? So giving the students a little bit of time to think, first of all, you'll notice that we've used this little icon here, which is an idea that came from a teacher last year, at the beginning of lockdown last year, wonderful idea. So the students have a little bit of time to collect their ideas. So red for I'm listening, amber for I'm thinking, and green for when they are ready to answer. You could use that in class with little, I don't know, little coloured cards, or maybe a little gesture to mean different things. So just so you get an idea of how much time they need. Maybe they're doing this collaboratively as well, and the groups can signal when they're ready to share their ideas. Moving on, we could then ask students, probably in groups now, how many different ways of telling the time can they think of? How many ways to tell the time can they find in their homes? So again, making it more personal to them and encouraging that collaboration and communication at this stage. So in groups now, let's see what you guys know as well. I'm always interested to see if people know the answers here. Usually just because I forget every time. So they're researching at this point. So asking the students to complete the pictures with the names. You could also ask them to draw quick sketches. Perhaps they have one at home so they can describe it. But again, just lots more collaboration, communication, and kind of hopefully, again, from what seems like quite a mundane task, trying to make it more personal to them and bring their own ideas. Okay, really important. On the next slide, you'll see here, we've given some ideas for roles and responsibilities. So really key stage for project work in class when you're asking students to work together in groups is to make sure they all understand what their responsibility is. Inevitably, we always have the students who will quite happily sit back and let other people do the work. So here, for example, we've set a timekeeper, somebody who's going to write back, somebody who's going to give the feedback. They might even be able to identify those roles and responsibilities themselves as well, so encouraging them to take more responsibility. So you can see here in the preparation stage of this project, really nicely kind of signposted here, what type of evaluation we can use at this point. And these are some of the resources we're going to share with you as well. And these are the ones that I am encouraging as well, secondary teachers. Take a look and you can probably adapt them as well. So self-evaluation, helping students to take control of their own learning, of course. And giving students, we're on the next slide, please, Mark.
Sorry.
Giving learners the chance to manage their own learning and development more independently. We all know that, but sometimes it's quite good just to remind ourselves why we are including those moments for self-evaluation. So, KWL chart, do you want to talk us through this, Mark?
Yeah, so for those of you, some of you might be familiar with the KWL chart, but it is such a powerful tool. I think it's worthwhile in many areas of the class, right? So first of all, we say, what do I already know? So when we start a topic, before we start anything, we think, okay, this is what I know about the festival in Jerez, to take an example from before. Then, what do I want to know? Well, where do those dresses come from? Who makes those dresses? Maybe that's going to be my objective. And then afterwards, we can say, what do I now know or know now? So again, taking and visualizing and being aware of our learning process. Where have I come from and where am I now? It's a really powerful reflective tool. And also, when you go back to it at a later date, it's such a great way to remind yourself. It helps with retention. You know, you can come back to it 3 months down the line after Christmas and say, oh, I remember that, you know, and it activates a load of knowledge from before. And we have a record of it, you know.
Yeah, so moving on to the organisation stage, students working together. We're going to skip right to the next slide, please, Mark. Really important again, here, if you are working or you know, at any point online, this is something that can be done quite easily in breakout rooms as well. Scaffolding, keeping track, making sure that the students are on track in their groups. A really nice thing about making sure they all have their clear responsibilities in their groups and when they're on task. For us as teachers, especially if you've got big classes, which I know most of you will, you're just one person. So moving around 6 different groups is of course a lot easier than trying to move around 30 different students, trying to help them all. So, and of course, inevitably, when they're working in mixed ability groups, there will be a certain amount of peer support happening there as well, especially if you're allowing the students to choose their own roles and responsibilities there. They can do the things that they're stronger at initially. So here, for the development stage, again, we've got some tools here for self-evaluation, for peer evaluation and observation. So we've got this resource that we're going to share with you, which is a learning diary. Just a really nice way for students, obviously, to keep track, quite similar to the task that we just looked at earlier. So asking them key questions. They don't even, in my opinion, they don't even really need to be writing this down all of the time either. And maybe I would probably turn this into maybe a space on the wall where they write post-its and they all stick them on all together, for example. But the nice thing here is that we can evaluate other things. Okay, so for example, collaboration. So we could give them some key questions for collaboration. Did I help my group? Did I share information? Did I do the task, my role, etc., etc. I've just picked out collaboration here, but it could be any of the competencies that you're asking the students there to just self-reflect on for a moment. And then peer evaluation, which is nice, but can be quite tricky. And I think the lovely thing is when we're focusing on the more, the competencies rather than the linguistic skills, it's kind of a safer environment for students to do this as well. So it provides a structured learning process to critique, to provide feedback to each other. I always insist that students start with what they enjoyed, what they liked, and what they think could be improved. Okay, so it's not what was good and what was bad. It was what was good about it, what I enjoyed, and what they could, what could be better about their work. So they're giving them tips and advice rather than critiquing them in that way, I suppose. But developing lifelong skills in assessing and providing feedback to others. And then that in turn, of course, helps them to think about their own learning process, and it helps them to self-assess and then to improve their own work as well. So a peer evaluation form, you're going to have this as well. So, emojis again. And you could add some more in there. It doesn't have to just be those 3 mundane emojis. We could add some more in there as well. But thinking about the 3 stages of the project, the preparation, the development, the production, and asking students, they could do this as a self-reflection activity first, and then do some peer evaluation too. And that takes us very quickly to the presentation stage. Really, really important part of this stage that I'm just going to pick out very quickly is the feedback. So here we said 1 or 2 minutes of questions from the audience. As a drama teacher, this is what I saw quite often, is when we have a drama or projects work, basically the whole time we prepare and then we develop and we present. And it's crucial that after that presentation or production stage, excuse me, that we take a moment to ask for self-assessment, some reflection, self-reflection, some peer assessment, and then the feedback from the teacher as well. Students will likely just present, that's it, big clap, woo-hoo-hoo, sit down, that's it, okay? A clap is wonderful. I think we should always give students a clap or some type of appreciation in that way, of course, but it's about taking that time. If you don't have enough time in the class, I always say, right, half of the groups are going to present next week, because it's really crucial that immediately after that production stage, we all take a moment to stop and reflect. And we're going to show you this very, very handy little chart that you can kind of think about each stage of the process here. So the who, self, peer, teacher and student evaluation, at which, when it happens, at which stage all of those things happen, and how they happen. It's just a really nice graphic for you to kind of refer back to, just as like a little reference, basically, for when you are doing project work in the class. And the rubric that Mark showed you earlier, we're going to give you that as well. Again, I think this can be adapted quite easily, but it's quite nice, and I would encourage us to share those objectives, to share this criteria with the students so they understand, why am I getting 3 in creativity? They can see where they are and how they can improve by comparing, okay?
Yeah, it gives a nice pathway, doesn't it?
Exactly, yeah. It's just a really good technique, isn't it? To kind of, for, even at primary, which is quite tricky, but this is the type of learning that we want to see happening in secondary, that students are really thinking about, well, where am I and where could I be if I can improve on A, B, or C? And I'll hand over to you, Mark. I've been talking far.
So the rubric is a really nice tool, but there are lots of different things and areas that we can evaluate. It's not just about, like we said, language or this, that, and the other, but there are things like we can also evaluate on effort and participation and their positivity and how positive were they, how much did they support their peers. That is another valuable skill, and that is also something we can look at. So it's all about thinking and looking at our profile of our learners and looking at the competencies. You can look at the Cambridge framework for life competencies and see what areas you think are best suited to your learners, and they fall within these categories. And it's all about just sort of setting on your local level, on your class level, the objectives that you want to achieve, as long as we're completing those competencies, you know. And I think that's kind of the message we're trying to get across, is that when it comes to competencies, it's flexible. It's all about the flexibility of it. Moving on, we're talking about reflecting specifically and evaluating. There's a really nice tool we can use, or a journey, bringing the journey metaphor back in. And this is the pathway. And basically, it's kind of, if we have something like this, maybe we could put it on the wall, or maybe we could have it in the notebooks. It's about following this journey. Before, what did I know before? And then the now, what do I know now? Then we look about the progress, that is, how am I going to improve in the future? What are my next steps? What am I going to move me forward towards my ultimate goal? And obviously, we need to set our long-term goal. You know, we need to say to ourselves, at the end of this term, I want to be able to do X, Y, Z. And we can start to think about our performance in class and see about how we are making our way along our personal learning journey.
It's just quite nice, isn't it, really, that imagery, because we've looked at a very similar kind of self-assessment tool, but, you know, it's in a chart, it's kind of different to kind of me, definitely as a learner, like I'd like to imagine it like this, you know, and I would encourage my students kind of, you know, and you said it, Mark, on the wall, or they could just design it in their own notebooks, for example. So I think it's just about that. It's about that imagery of it, isn't it, of being here and wanting to get there.
Yeah, because what that does is it kind of helps learners visualize a growth mindset. It's not that I'm stuck and it's okay, but I have steps ahead. It could be, maybe you could do steps on a ladder or stepping stones in a garden path. It doesn't matter how it is, but it's...
Oh, you're getting creative now. Oh, at 6:30 in the evening.
I know. Hold me back. So the idea is it's about going... visualizing the journey, isn't it?
Yeah.
And another activity that we're really fond of is called the message in the bottle. And this is just a simple way of doing that. And what we do at the end of a unit or a project or an activity, learners on a post-it note, they write a letter for their future selves. So how am I going to do the next project better? Well, in my next project, I am going to try to speak more often. And they take that post-it note and they stick it on the next culture page or the next CLIL page or whatever page it is. And then when we get to it later on in the unit, they open it up and they see the post-it note and they go, oh yeah, I was going to do that. It's like a little prompt. It's a
like,
nudge.
Oh no, I promised I'd do that and I've forgotten.
But the good thing is it's a promise to themselves. We don't have to be involved in that,
yeah.
You know, so it's a good life skill, that. And that leads us on to the final point that we're going to look at, which is going to be looking at competencies in CLIL lessons. So we've been sharing lots of lovely ideas. If you'd like to share in the chat box a suggestion on competencies with CLIL, but I think you've got the message already that when we talk about literature projects and CLIL or culture, we're talking about covering a whole range of competencies at the same time. It's all about the flexibility that they offer to us. And on that note, we have a nice CLIL lesson here. Okay, in this lesson, it covers 4 key competencies. Again, choose the ones you prefer. These are the ones we've identified. Linguistic, because we're language teachers. It's mathematics or STEM. So in this case, it'll be science. We're talking about social here. We're also talking about our citizenship, our role in society. But don't forget, these are the general ones. These are the ones for all subjects. Don't forget, they also cover all of the specific competencies for our language-specific area. Speaking, reading, writing, listening, interaction, mediation, plurilinguismo, competencia cultural. So what we're going to do now is we're going to show you 2 activity cards, and we would like you to tell us where you could use them in this lesson. So here's your first activity card. This is the...
Oh, you're mean, Mark.
I
making
know.
people do work at this time in the evening.
I've made it fairly, I would say easy. I wouldn't say easy, but I've made it nice. They're not challenging activities. So we got the Venn one, and we've also got This Makes Me Think. So This Makes Me Think is about when you've seen, listened, heard, read something. They do a mind map in a group saying this makes me think. So just have a look at this activity. Okay, this is a primary CLIL activity, but again, applicable to secondary CLIL completely. Okay, have a look and think, where could we use these activities?
The lovely thing about these activity cards is they really are kind of so adaptable and applicable to, you know, any activity. I mean, these ones are for young learners, right, Mark? There's also ones for teen. Obviously, we're, you know, asking for higher levels of input there, but they're really nice because you can just kind of pick out any one activity card, take a look at your content for that lesson, and think about how you can use it with that. So that's what we've done here.
It's like a springboard. I like that metaphor. It's like a springboard to dive off of. It's, oh, this is a nice Venn. Well, maybe I'm not going to do a Venn. Maybe I'm going to do another type of graphic, but it's a stimulus, isn't it? That's what it is. They're really, and they're great ideas. I mean, download the packs, because I think there's like 60 activities in each pack, 60 in primary, 60 in secondary, and there's even one for adults. So maybe that will work for Bachelor Bata. But anyway, we're going to jump ahead. No one's being creative.
Let's see what you've done. Show us what you've done earlier. Is that the phrase?
Here's one I prepared earlier.
That's it. Thank you.
So for the finding connections, this would work really nicely with the first video. So once our kids have watched the documentary video, they can work in a group, write on a piece of paper, this makes me think of, and then share the different ideas that they have on this makes me think of this, or this makes me think of that. And being aware, listening, communicating with their friends and their peers, trying to understand the subject better. And the Venn diagram is a great opportunity to use with this activity here. So this activity was about the good. What activities are good for our planet? Well, maybe we could adapt this to be things that I can do to help our planet, and things that the people I live with can do to help our planet, whether it's their parents, their grandparents, their brothers, their cousins, whatever their family situation is, you know. The idea being that we're allowing our learners to visualize and understand, well, yes, I can contribute, but other people contribute, and there's things we all do together. You know, it's about assuming personal and social responsibility. And we'll even put a little bonus activity in there for you as well. So this one is just looking at social responsibilities here. This one's nice because it's a nice one to do. You just get them to put a picture in the middle of the page, and then they say what their responsibilities are. So we put a few suggestions up, haven't we, Rachel? We have, yeah. The first
Nothing
one
more to say about it. Just our suggestions. Turn the lights off.
For the parents out there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Who run around the house shouting at their kids, turn the lights off. Yeah, right. So this is just like little things there. So these little activities, just taking content and using the book and the course and the material as a springboard to active learning, taking it a step further and associating it to our learners. And that's where you're going to cover all or most of your competencies. Very briefly, before we finish up, we wanted to mention plurilinguismo, because we haven't mentioned it much here, but in many projects and in many CLIL lessons and in our normal lessons, we create learner dictionaries, but maybe in these learner dictionaries, we can encourage our learners to not just put the English to Spanish or English to, if they're a Catalan speaker or a Basque speaker, we can encourage them to put them across international languages, like English, in this case, is Spanish, French, and German. There's a little fun activity where they find the words in other languages, and they can see how really a lot of the languages are quite similar. Then there's German, which isn't similar, it seems, ever. But it's fun, it's funny, and it's encouraging like a funness to language, And no doubt they'll be running around the class saying Futterung, which is quite a fun word to say, no? But again, it doesn't have to be foreign languages. It can be local languages. Here we have in Spanish, we have in Catalan, and we have in Euskera. The idea being that they're aware of their local languages, or depending on our focus, you know? But that awareness of other languages is a real powerful tool, and that's why it's been included in there. Again, in this activity, CLIL activities, it's a perfect chance to use this message in a bottle activity again. You know, take it a note. What did I do well in this lesson? What have I learned? Maybe I can write a reminder. Oh, I found out that I should turn the lights off because Mark said so. And they stick it in the next CLIL lesson and then they'll have a laugh about it later. But it's all about reactivating knowledge. And
so a lot of information. Thank you so much for sticking with us, because we know that was, you know, we've run through a lot of ideas, but hopefully what's come across is that, you know, we are doing this already in our classes. I think it's about us recognizing and extending and exploiting the things that we're already doing. And Alex, our wonderful colleague, now is going to pop those links into, that link looks a bit strange, Alex. I'm not sure if it's the right hyperlink. We are going to give you the guides to the project work. We're going to give you the guides to the primary projects as well. And don't forget to go and check out those competency activity cards, because as you can see, the majority of the activities that we've covered in the session today were just taken from there. And, you know, it did not take us a long time to prepare those type of activities. We just looked at the activity card, thought about certain content and thought about how we can apply that in class.
Yeah, sorry, just quickly, before you leave, I know everyone's going to be quick to get off. I would encourage you, please, to remember that next week we have our first of 2 mediation sessions. So these sessions are going to be looking at mediation in more detail with our wonderful colleague Victoria, who is such a fountain of great ideas and knowledge on the topic. Really take the time, have a look at this, register, please do. And also don't forget that you can also give us feedback. We really love to know. You'll also get a certificate of attendance if you do your feedback here, okay? But there's an opportunity to share your ideas. What do you want to see? Okay, we're going to be preparing specific sessions for the people who attend these webinars, okay? You're in control. It's all in your hands. Tell us what you want and we'll put it together. We'll do the best. You are our bosses. You know, you are the ones who tell us what to do, right? So please take a moment to fill out the feedback form. Let us know. Let us know what it is you want to see. Let us hear your voices and your opinions. A
couple of quick things. I've just popped the hyperlinks in for the project work. How do people access the previous webinar, Mark?
Yep, so if you want to, you should receive an email with the replay link.
If they registered, right? If they didn't register for the first webinar?
If you didn't register, you do get in contact with me and I will be sure to pass you the correct link. Okay, so my email address is here. Send me an email. I tend to be quite quick. I don't know if all of you send me a message at the same time. You may have to wait a day, but I'll do my best to get the messages to you, right? So the point is we want you to get in touch. We want you to speak with us. We're open. We're here for you. Talk to us. Speak with us.
We're here to support. Exactly. That is the bottom line. And thank you so much for your suggestions, your ideas, and thank you for your lovely comments at the end. That really does mean a lot. And yeah, please, as Mark said, give us some feedback so we can really start to think about the sessions going forward as well. And yeah, have a lovely evening. Thank you so much for joining us.
Cheers, guys. Thanks, everybody.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye now. Thank you.